welcome to Monday Morning Detective, the podcast, episode 7. And I am the host, Gino Scala. Today we're going to discuss briefly the Sherry Papini fake kidnapping. Now, this is a case we all probably followed. It was on the news quite a bit back in 2016 when it actually occurred. A very attractive mid-30s blonde woman in Northern California was allegedly kidnapped or taken off the streets in some manner and missing for several weeks. She is married and has a couple of children. And generally, as in this case, when it was first released to the news, there's not much hope. These don't end well. As a general rule, the victim is found later, near an abandoned building, inside an abandoned building, naked, and sexually assaulted and murdered. That's been the almost standard result in cases like this. But that's not to say it happens all the time, and in this case it did not. 3 weeks later, she was found released on the side of the road, wrapped in chains and with a broken nose, her hair cut, her long blonde hair had been sheared, and various bruises and scratches, and she had lost a significant amount of weight. She was down to 85 pounds. And she was found on the side of the road where a neighbor picked her up and brought her to the hospital, etc. So, voila, we have a victim of a kidnapping who is actually released relatively unharmed. She denies being sexually assaulted. She claimed that the suspects were 2 Hispanic females, and she was mostly blindfolded and kept in some kind of darkened room on a bare mattress for most of her time in being held by the kidnappers. No ransom was ever asked for that I'm aware of, and so she was kidnapped and released 3 weeks later. None worse for wear. At least she was alive. Well, after the initial interview, the police found a lot of things wrong with her story. First of all, it doesn't fit the criminology of this case. Now, they don't all fit the same criminology, which is, breaking down these events as they occur in a historical reference. But a pair of Hispanic female kidnappers is extremely rare. And to kidnap a female, another female, not for ransom, not for sexual assault purposes, or not for revenge or any other reason that they can determine, it just doesn't make sense. Kidnapping is a lifetime in prison offense in most cases. If the person dies, of course, it is a death penalty case. So to do that, there has to be an extreme reason to do it. And this is what the investigators are thinking. What, in this case, is the extreme reason for doing so? No ransom, no sexual assault, and no likelihood of revenge, as in maybe something business related or personal, some type of personal revenge. So those theories are out the window, which makes the story less credible. Now, behind the scenes, they were doing quite a bit of work. Again, they have no time limit on investigating these cases. Everybody at the drop-off scene was interviewed. No one saw the van, supposedly, that dropped her off. No one saw the actual kidnapping. So we have someone in broad daylight on both instances that were unseen in the area. We also have videotapes of businesses and major intersections and buses passing by and drivers with their dashboard cams, and no video was ever uncovered of either the kidnapping itself or the release of the suspect. Then they investigate the cell phones. And from there, it led to about 20 warrants being drawn. Along the lines, DNA was searched on her clothing, and the DNA came back to herself and an unknown male subject, not her husband. No other unknown female subs were, the DNA was not found. So it's highly unlikely that, well, let's put it this way. Once the DNA came back, the police were no longer looking for two Hispanic female suspects. It is this unknown male. So you do a victimology study on Sherry, determine that she has an ex-boyfriend, and the case pretty much fell apart at that point as far as Sherry is concerned. Why it took 5 years, I'm not exactly sure. I know DNA takes a while to come back. Not, I don't know. I know they talked to the husband prior to him divorcing her and learning something about the ex-boyfriend. I'm sure some information was found on the cell phones regarding contacts with one another, even though she probably attempted to delete it and so forth. Well, make a long story short, she was confronted with this information. Well, actually, it was prior to March 3rd of 2022, because on March 3rd she was arrested on the federal charges of faking her own kidnapping and other things. She obviously confessed. At this point, the boyfriend is not part of the scheme. He did spend time with her in a hotel. I believe they did have sex. He did break her nose, but at her instruction, and he used a hockey stick, so that's pretty odd. She cut her own hair, and this was her plan from the very beginning. I think, ultimately when it comes down to why she did this, she wanted to get away. She obviously is unstable mentally, and she'll be responsible for all the costs incurred by this investigation. What's probably the most disturbing aspect of this is using another people of color as a suspect. This happens quite frequently. Susan Smith, as you recall, when her kids were drowned in the vehicle, she was carjacked by a black male. And this is all too common. And the fact is that Hispanic females rarely attack victims of outside of their race. The occasional black male on white male or female crime is generally a crime of opportunity. And so it raises a lot of red flags when a white victim describes the suspect as a person of color. Now, this is not a liberal talking point. I'm not a liberal in any stretch of the imagination. We're just going based on statistics. Of course, it can't be overlooked. So they do naturally investigate those areas. But just from a general numbers point in society and in the area in which certain people live, Susan Smith in, I think it was South Carolina, in her town, and this was in Yolo County, up in Redding. While there are Hispanics there, and in South Carolina there are African Americans there, the percentage of the population is much smaller for Hispanic females. So, it just reduces that likelihood considerably. So if it did turn out to be Hispanic females, it would be a very rare case indeed. And again, this is what they go off of. Usually white males, numbers wise, usually white males offend against white females, and black on black crime we're familiar with, and things of that nature. So for this to be a more believable, more credible story, had he been a white male working alone using a van, that would be almost a standard kidnapping case. Also, in that situation, she probably would not have been released alive. So anyway, that will conclude this episode of Monday Morning Detective, the Sherry Papini case, the kidnapping hoax, and we'll talk to you very soon. Have a great day.